Hi, everybody. This is Anju Gitani. Welcome to Story Mantra, the mantra I've been living my life by for 20 years now. And I'm super thrilled proud and super thrilled again, because I'm so excited to hand over the introduction to Lindsay Preston, my co-host, who has got a phenomenal person on board with us today. Lindsay?
So in honor of National Novel Writing Month, we have on Kathy Meis from Publish. Publish is probably the best self-publishing company online today by far. And so we brought her here to basically talk to you about what do you do during this process of writing your novel this month, and what do you do when it's done? So Kathy, do you want to start by what should these people be thinking about while they are writing their novel this month?
Yeah, and I have a question for you, Kathy. What does NaNoWriMo mean to you from your perspective?
Oh, I love it because it's so exciting to see the community around writing, because it's a lonely business, especially during COVID. But, you know, you go to your computer and people are writing in isolation, and this National Novel Writing Month just gives everybody this sense of doing it together. And I just think that's incredible all across the world. I mean, you know, and people are supporting each other. There's that whole goal, you know, which I think is so incentivizing for people to have like a daily goal, and you can kind of quantify where you are. And even if you don't finish, you know, you don't reach the word goal, you did something, you move forward, and that's an incredible thing. And I think it's, I love it. I've watched it grow over the years. I just think it's incredible. And, you know, to answer your question, Lindsay, is what should they be thinking about is, you know, first of all, craft, I think is really important, and studying your craft, and then also just doing it, right? So sometimes you self-edit. NaNoWriMo, I think, is a month where you just get it on paper, and sometimes that's very liberating. And I also think the other thing is audience, which, and your goals. So one of the things I've talked about a lot is sharing your journey. It's one of the reasons we built the book bubble at Publish, and you can actually share excerpts from your manuscript. And it's because I believe in today's world, where authors can speak in so many ways directly to their readers, that they should start letting the world know that their work is coming very early, and really sharing the experience, the creative journey. Because quite honestly, the thing we know that breaks through the noise in a marketplace where 70,000 books are published every month is this connection to the craft, this connection to the human being who sat down and wrote this gift really for the world, and had the bravery to put it out there. And if you show someone a little bit of what that journey looks like while you're doing it, it's very powerful. And it's, you know, you see some of the top authors in the world just constantly engaging with their audience. And someone who always inspires me, because he's not a young man, is Paulo Coelho. And, you know, I remember one night being on Twitter, and there he was just in his living room, just answering questions from all over the world. And there were like 3 of us on, just asking him questions. And I had this very intimate moment with this very amazing man. And I got to ask him a few questions about The Alchemist. And I was like, I mean, I was just like butter just melting. It was so incredible. And it's just because he so fully lives for his work, and to be there for his audience and to give, you know, he has kind of like a servant leader approach to it. So I do think that even though it's all about that word count and go, don't forget that you are writing this gift for the world, and they love to be included in that journey. And it's very powerful over time if you're willing. And it does take some braveness, you know, involve them a little bit, let them give you feedback, make it a little more open process. It's an interesting change in the way things are published.
And it's not too early for someone to join Publish right now and start their book bubbles, is it?
No, you can actually, we have an ebook creator, so you can write your book on Publish And when you're done, you can click a button and you have an ebook that's ready to distribute. It's all formatted for you, but you can also share excerpts from the manuscript while you go, and they're called rough cut book bubbles. And it's a little excerpt and then, you know, the story behind it and what you're working on. And we prompt every week, we give a prompt that can help you write. It's like 250 words. So I encourage people to, we've had people have like 100,000 views of their work before they even went into pre-order.
That's amazing, especially since that is one of the things that really matters to people, especially if they want to try to traditionally publish. Those books, having the views in that audience helps that. And I think a lot of authors, especially people who are going to be writing this month, are going to be thinking, I want to go and have Simon & Schuster publish my book.
Right.
And it has become a super competitive market. And unfortunately, not as many people are going to have that kind of success. But fortunately, there are places like Publish where they can come and their works can still get read and they can still have a great deal of success. Can you kind of talk a little bit about the difference or what people can expect from a self-publisher versus what they picture with a traditional publisher?
I also had a question, Kathy, if I could just put it in terms of, developmental edits with Publish. How do you handle that for beginner writers who are just jumping in, getting their feet wet, looking for feedback as well with the, choices and options to offer?
Yeah, sure. So, to start with the difference between traditional and self-publishing, it's really a different business model. With traditional publishing, you are selling your rights and then the publisher owns the work. What you get up front is that, hopefully you get great editors and all of the upfront costs are handled by the publisher. So they do have final say and control over the look and feel and marketing of the book, but you don't have to pay. Now, in selling those rights, though, you do also then lose kind of the potential should things go really big. They've probably bought almost all the rights. But I think now, Lindsay, as you're mentioning, it's always been a little eye of the needle to get into a house, and it's gotten narrower over time. But I've always thought of traditional publishers like angel investors, right? So they invest in the book, and then they get their share first, and you get your share after you earn back any kind of advance. Advances, I think, are also much lower for most people, unless you can really kind of give proof that you can deliver an audience and a lot of sales. The big thing that's changed is that, right now, sadly, a lot of bookstores are closed. A lot of signings are closed. I think marketing budgets have gotten tighter. You don't see the big travel campaigns that you used to have. And that whole world was designed for physical shelves. So it was really 3 to 6 months to find if a book was going to be a success and get a bigger marketing budget. And now I think with self-publishing, and online purchases, the shelves just keep expanding, and that has its own problems, but it does mean a book that's doing well can keep growing, and that it's more of a long tail play. Like we've had a lot of authors that start out with one book, and as they go, they start to, have people who want to come back because they're building their list, and they really start to hit some pretty impressive numbers when they're on book 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, right? And what you see is that read through, right? So the more books you have, the more you're able to hit people one way and bring them into your universe of content, and then they want everything that you've written because they're delighted by it. So I think, there are also, traditional publishing has gotten much better at business to consumer selling, but in the beginning, they really were business to business. They sold to bookstores. So now in trying to sell directly to consumers, the author is kind of in the middle there, and the author has a lot of power. And I think a lot of authors are experimenting with hybrid types of publishing models where they've had traditional contracts, but they try 1 or 2 books that they self-publish. They've got a brand that's recognizable. So it's interesting times. And what I love about it is that the author really is in control now. And that was not the case. The author did not have the choices that they have. And so with self-publishing, you're an entrepreneur. At Publish, we say authorpreneurs, because it is an entrepreneurial journey where you have decided to be the publisher of your own book. And that means you learn the business side of publishing the book, not just the craft, but you learn about the distribution, you learn about the marketing. And, you know, that's not for everyone. And entrepreneurialism is a tough road, but you do keep a lot more of the royalties. You have a lot more control over the look and feel of your book. I've always said, and I think some of the first people into the self-publishing world, you know, if you write literary fiction, that's a tougher audience to find, right? So maybe literary fiction, it might make a lot of sense to go for that publisher who has that kind of audience. And knows how to reach them. But if you write a business book and it's tied to the brand of your business, and you want control over everything about how that looks and feels, then you want to keep your rights and you want to self-publish. But if you're somewhere in the middle with genre fiction, the interesting thing is, you know, the US book market is a $26 billion industry, and 20% of the sales now, the revenue is generated by self-published authors. So they're really have a seat at the table now. And it's a force to be reckoned with, because a lot of these authors have learned to run very, very successful businesses. They know their audience, they own their email list, they write great books, they delight their people, they get great reviews, and they keep writing, and they've got incredible businesses. So it's an entrepreneurial journey. So it's a lot to decide, but the other key is that you don't always get a choice, because I don't think, you know, the gate is not widening in New York, it's getting narrower. So if you don't want to wait for several years to go through the process with an agent and try to get into a house, and then, you know, make sure you're happy with the contract that you're offered, then, you know, self-publishing is a great way to get started and build an audience as well. And a lot of self-published authors have been picked up later, and some of them have, you know, decided not to sell all their rights. You know, Hugh Howey is a perfect example of someone who wrote 7 books in the beginning of the whole ebook phenomena, and did really, really well. And when he was approached with a big deal, he sold his print rights. He sold a lot of the secondary rights, but he kept his ebook rights. And he was the first self-published author in the world to do that. But he built the audience, and he said, I'm keeping the rights. So there's a lot. It's interesting times, really interesting times, very disrupted industry, which I love. It's fun to be an entrepreneur in a disrupted industry.
So what guidance do you give, Kathy, to, you know, really newbie entrepreneurs who are looking to break into that market, do things for themselves on their terms and conditions, you know, with the developmental copy edits and support, really? Because we go in clueless, we really do.
Well, Anju, to your question, editing. So I've been an editor for 30 years, and I think there's a couple of mistakes I see frequently with independent authors because they mostly do think about the story. I don't see a lot of thinking about the audience up front, and I think a good developmental editor who works in your genre is going to be able to speak to those conventions that readers are going to expect. So the interesting thing is, if you think of a place like Amazon, an online retailer where the book literally has to sell itself.
Right.
So I come to that product page, and you have 7 seconds, not you, your book has 7 seconds to say, this is for you. It's really interesting. Go into the look inside feature. And then you go in the look inside feature. That's a really big conversion just to get them into that. And then the book opens in a way that just does not engage that type of reader. You know, like a thriller that's cerebral and quiet at the beginning. Like, that's just not how a thriller opens.
Right.
If you want. And so I say to authors, you know, if you're working, if commercial success is important to you, you know, and you're working with a developmental editor, you want to work with someone who really knows that readership and what they like. And you can do a lot of research. We do positioning studies, which is really, you know, close to what the houses do, where they, you know, study those comparable titles. What are people saying when they review the books, what they love and what they hate? You'll see a lot of interesting tidbits and changes in reader taste as they happen. How do they write that synopsis? You know, what does a look inside feature look like? What does the cover look like? All of those things that go into having a book that's going to grab someone's attention in a very short amount of time. Because the hand sell is wonderful. To go into a bookstore, it's one of my favorite forms of entertainment in the world. And just browse with a cup of coffee. Who doesn't love that? But, you know, about 5 years ago, the flip happened where more books were purchased online than in physical bookstores. We go to all the shows in the fall, the American bookseller shows that are regional, like SEBA, Southern Independent, NABA. So we meet them all over the country, and the indie bookstores were really coming back. I think that it was a really terrible blow during COVID. It has been really, really tough. But the key is the hand sell is what they do so great, right? They literally say, I love this book, you should read it. I know your reading taste, here you go. And that doesn't happen on a place like, you know, Apple Books or Barnes and Noble online or Kobo.
Well, indie bookstores build a community, you know, of readers. They do. They build a community of readers, and then they have the separate community sort of entity for authors to come in for signings, even teach workshops. So it kind of like becomes a meeting ground of readers and writers.
Exactly. They're very special places, and we're big into supporting them in any way we can. And I just think, you know, today that authors just need to be aware that the book also needs to sell itself, really, for that online market, which is bigger than ever during COVID, for good or bad. I don't know. But yeah, I would say that the positioning, so thinking, and this is something that, you know, getting back to before we started taping, we were talking about goals. So there's a lot of different phases in your publishing career, and at different phases, you'll have different goals, but you need to be really honest with yourself about what your goals are. And, you know, a lot of people will be like, well, you know, Aunt Sarah's going to just proofread this book for me, and then I would like to be a New York Times bestseller. And I'm not making that up. I've heard those exact phrases. And you just want to say, first of all, New York Times bestseller, that is an extremely specific strategy. So specific, you can't even believe, to get on that particular list. So that's a knowledge thing about the industry. And secondly, you know, have you had anybody beta read it? Have you had an editor look at it? Have you had a read through of the manuscript to say that that's the right fit? Like that a proofread by someone who's not a professional is really going to give you the manuscript that's going to resonate with lots of people. And I think, you know, people have to realize if they are starting this entrepreneurial journey, they need to invest in great editors, and that requires research and making sure that the person is a qualified editor. There's a lot of people just hanging that out on that shingles on the door, and suddenly they're editors, but they're not. You know, that's, I think, a strength at Publish, because I know how to vet editors, because I have been one for so many years. And then thinking about the book as an information or entertainment product. If you do want commercial success, like where does this book belong in a world where 70,000 books are published each month? Like there's genres, there's subgenres. Go on a place like Amazon and look at, like, is this book like mine? Like, who's reading this book? Like, is my book like this one? Like, think about the book as something that has to be placed in a marketplace. And that's a hard thing when you're in craft mode, right? So you have craft mode and you have commerce mode. And I have always said, when you think of like Etsy, that's creative commerce. writing a book is a form of creative commerce. And there are just people who will never get used to the idea that if they want to make money, they have to think of it in those terms. And I try to speak pretty frankly about the business side of it, because that's what publishers do. Publishers are about selling books. And if you are going to publish your book and become the publisher of your book, you have to have a little bit of that business mindset. Like, who are you speaking to? Who do you want to delight? If you get that right in the manuscript and you understand your audience, those little gold stars just come easily. I mean, because you've written a book and given it to this particular type of reader, and they're like, wow, this is great. But if you write a book with no sense of, who the audience is, you can get some really bad reviews. And it's not that it's a bad story. It's just like, you're telling me this is a thriller. This isn't reading like a thriller. Or you're telling me this is a women's fiction and it's all romance. I mean, those types of mistakes are made all the time, not understanding the book marketplace. And it makes me sad because, great stories get lost, and a great editor will guide you through that kind of market side of it. That, I say all great marketing begins in the manuscript, because it's about speaking to someone, understanding, who you hope to delight, even literary readers. I'm a literary reader. I'm a persona too. I have certain taste, and if you hit those buttons, boom, boom, you're getting those stars. But if I'm really like turned off by something, and you can't delight everyone, but at least, understand who I am. Think about me as a person who's the recipient of this gift that you put out there into the world. And that's kind of where craft and commerce meet. And that's,
I guess, for us writers to interpret that, and maybe Lindsay would be able to help me out on this as well, is like what you're saying is, for us as writers, on the writing perspective, we build our story, we, sift through and clarity, get everything right on the developmental front, then take a good hard look and say, okay, who's our audience? Who do we need to filter the story more down for?
Well, and even a great developmental editor, quite honestly, should know those things. That's, to me, that's part of a developmental edit. If you were to come to me and say, these are my goals as an author, and this is, the type of story I have to tell, I'm editing with the mindset of the audience. No developmental editors at a house aren't thinking about audience when they're developmentally editing. I mean, would you agree with that, Lindsay?
Oh, absolutely. I think they think more about it than even a typical developmental editor.
Right.
Because
too much that
doing it on a regular basis, I know that like I have to remind myself to do it, whereas that's all they're thinking about. And actually, on that note, we have to wrap up. So everybody who's watching, think about it. Think about who you're writing for. Think about how your book is going to meet commerce and how you're going to sell a successful story. And we will be back next week with Kathy to discuss more. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.